I'm from the Center for Urban Transportation Research at University of South Florida, and one of our strong partners in all that we do is the Florida Department of Transportation. And I really think that they need to be applauded for taking a leadership role in such a high-profile role as a state DOT. Not many states are doing this, so it's exciting to be in a research university and have a partner like DOT who's interested. I was asked to talk to you a little bit about something called the Automated Vehicle Institute, common misnomers, spend some time about what local governments and TPOs ought to be thinking about, and then look at what I think will happen 25 years ago, and if you can find me, you can tell me I was wrong. So, a little bit about Qatar. This is the gratuitous self-promotion, since I have the microphone. We're a center of research faculty. Most of us have held senior positions in private or public sector. We do have academics that work with us. We don't research part-time and teach full-time. We do have access to the academic and scientific community at the university. We try to link those people up with the real world problems that cities, counties, states, and the Federal Department of Transportation have around the country. We do about $14 million in sponsored research. So there was $14 million worth of stuff that people felt like they could pay us to help them deal with. $14 million worth of problems that they helped us solve. We get little to no funding from the university, so it behooves us to do a decent job. Objectivity is our trademark, and that's what we tried to do. We're home to a couple of centers, in addition to this Automated Vehicle Institute. We're home to the National Center for Transit Research, and I'm going to talk probably a lot about transit in a few minutes. And we're also home to the National Bus Rapid Transit Institute. And if you don't know what Bus Rapid Transit is, we'll talk a few minutes about that. First, I was asked to talk about the Institute. And when people say there's an Automated Vehicle Institute at Qatar, they expect to come see us in lab coats working on something that looks like a Google car. And that's really not what it's about. The Institute is really a collaborative congregation of public policy folks and some of the scientific community in our computer science departments and our robotics departments that are really dealing with kind of policy issues. We were established in 2013 by our former director, who perhaps got a little bit ambitious and out in front of himself when he called this thing an institute and announced to that we were in existence. Nonetheless, we're here, and our first foray into this whole realm was with our local toll agency, which is the Tampa-Hillsborough Expressway Authority, because they have this elevated reversible highway that runs in from Brandon to downtown. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it makes for a nice potential test bed, in addition to the test bed that the DOT has just up the road here in Orlando. Because you can close the facility and not really impact traffic test technologies and that sort of thing. So we're in partnership with them, and I'll talk a little bit about how. This is our mission, is really to help communities and groups like this and the public with the policy and planning issues. I don't want to be the Debbie Downer here. I won't be, because I'm excited about this stuff. But there are some, as Richard alluded to, there are some big issues that need to be solved, and we're trying to be positioned to be able to do that. We talked briefly about the product liability issues or the personal liability issues, the cybersecurity associated with these kinds of systems. Those are the kinds of issues, in addition to trying to calculate what efficiencies could be gained by the introduction, and will be gained, because this is coming whether we want it or not, and most of us in the business are really excited about it, and we can't wait for it to be here. So our general body of work consists of four things. One is information dissemination through listservs and webinars and public outreach like this. Second thing is to collect data on pilot projects and experiments that are going on around the country. then talk about and look at the policy implications of these things that I was talking about, so that we're in a position to advise the DOT or another state or whoever who are moving down this path as well. And last is to monitor demonstrations. We've been doing this in the area of bus rapid transit, which is really a high-speed transit capacity mode of transportation that can carry as many folks on an hourly basis as a light rail system, but has the additional flexibility to be able to move where demand is. And there's a lot of automated technologies that have been introduced into this mode. And in several states, we've done a lot of work in Oregon with different things that they've tried on their buses, evaluate the safety, the performance, that sort of thing, and report back nationally on what we're finding. So that's what we're about. If you want to visit the Institute, you're going to see a bunch of offices and guys in polo shirts sitting at computers. It's not really as exciting as it sounds, but it's got a flashy name. I guess that's cool. Some of the stuff that we worked on, the most significant thing to get us started was the Florida Department of Transportation asked us to assist in the first summit that Secretary Biter talked about that was held in Tampa, along with the Expressway Authority. I'll talk about some of the white papers that are available on the website there, automatedvehicleinstitute.org. And we've assisted with the plan for the Tampa region that included a big group of stakeholders, including the district folks from District 7, to do for Tampa what Richard is talking about doing for the entire state. And that is to let the world know that we're open for business. We want these businesses to be here. We're one of 4 states that has the legislation. We have the all-round weather to be able to test whatever we need to. We have an educated workforce. We have a great university system. If you're going to relocate somewhere, we know Silicon Valley. We're not going to steal everyone from there. But this is a great place to live and work. Why not be here? And that's what we're trying to help the Tampa region do, the economic development folks, the Expressway Authority, and the district convince folks around the country. The working groups, I don't know if you remember Richard's slide, but he talked about the different working groups that they've set up, that we've been invited to participate in their transit working group. We publish a journal of public transportation internationally, and the upcoming issue is solely dedicated to automated vehicle technologies in public transportation. And we're out there developing contacts with tech companies and bringing them in, showing what the assets are, introducing them to the people in the community, again, to try and get some synergy going to have some exciting things happen in Tampa. We are also partnering with the transit agency in Hillsborough County, the Expressway Authority, the city, and perhaps the port. There's a huge Federal Highway Administration request for proposals that's out that will be highly competitive, millions and millions of dollars, that will demonstrate what Richard referred to as vehicle-to-infrastructure and vehicle-to-vehicle technologies. We've helped the group put a plan together, and if they're awarded it, we're hoping that they'll ask us to be a part of the evaluation team if they get it. We're in active, in fact, we have a meeting tomorrow with an undisclosed potential site where Florida DOT has asked us to work with someone who's interested in testing that vehicle he showed you, where he talked about the potential for moving around military bases, the fully automated light vehicle. That's exciting. We're hoping that's going to work. And again, FDOT is partnering with us on that. Just to give you sort of a laundry list of the kind of things we're examining, I've highlighted here. I'm not going to read all this. But when all this comes, not if it comes, but when all this comes, what are the implications for public transit? What about planning and what you all are engaged in? I'm going to talk about that. Was one of the topics that I was asked to speak to. What about managed lanes? How many of these things do you need before a managed lane really makes benefit cost sense to take a lane out of service for general purpose use and devote it to these? What what can we really realistically expect to achieve when in highway operations and safety improvements and those sorts of things. And the thing that intrigues me is the last one, the safety issue. Commissioner said it, Secretary said it, in terms of the fatalities. Now, if you think about a system ultimately that's so smart that it's not, cars aren't running into each other, okay? Just the potential implications on the size of vehicles and the weight of vehicles. All of this, you know, you don't have to carry steel beams in the doors and all this gear and exploding things for your airbags, and the alternative propulsion things then become electric vehicles are much lighter. You're not having to move things around. That has a huge potential in both the trucking industry, for public transportation buses, and for vehicles as well. Okay, this is the more fun stuff that Tom asked me to talk about. Common misconceptions. So I came up with 3, and I think first is automated vehicles are Google cars. And people flip out when I go walk around and say we're working on automated vehicles. And again, Secretary Biter did a really nice job of defining these things. But I've sort of cut it a little differently in terms of talking about automated versus autonomous. Automated vehicles, you probably have some level of automation in the vehicle you're driving today, whether it be stability control, cruise control, and I'll talk about the levels again that Richard mentioned as well. This evolution is accelerating. The stuff is coming, and the integration of these systems we call automated vehicle technologies. The autonomous is that level 4 vehicle that Richard talked about, the Google car. It's really a robotic sense, plan, act. So there's been 2 strains of research since this thing has started. And again, I agree with Secretary Biter, not because he's my biggest research sponsor, but because I agree with him. And that is, some people were really set on, we're going to make the highway smart. We're going to make the highway smart, and the car can be dumb. And then the Silicon Valley guy said, that'll take them forever, and it'll cost too much. We're going to make the car smart, and we don't care if the highway thinks, because the car, all the brains are going to be in the car. The reality is, it's going to be a combination of those things that in my opinion, and we're beginning to see it already, emerge as a way towards the future. I won't bore you with this because I think Richard covered this, but I'm going to refer to these levels later on when I talk a little bit about what we see in the future. And where we are now, as he said, is right here at level 2, where braking and cruise control are working together. Lane centering and automatic braking are beginning to work together. Level 3 is when that stuff is all working together to the point where you really don't have to guide it, but it's going to require you being there, just in case there's a failure, or there aren't other infrastructure systems to keep you from crashing or something. And then level 4 is ultimate Google car thing. I'll go by this quickly because again, I think Richard covered this more than adequately, which is, in addition to this stuff in the cars will be talking to each other, communicating with each other, and the vehicles will be communicating with the infrastructure. And these things are out there. They're beginning to happen. Smart signal systems. I mean, buses have had signal preemption systems on them for years. Traffic signals have now are able to be very inexpensively adapted to this technology to sense when priority vehicle's coming, whether it's an emergency response vehicle or a transit bus or whatever you want to give a priority to. So the stuff is coming. Now, what are our challenges? You know, this all sounds great. First of all, the vehicle cost. I mean, just the thing that sits on top of the Google car, the LiDAR, the light emitting distance, I have to check my notes, the thing that senses where you are is about 70 grand. But, you know, a couple years ago, it was several $100,000, so the cost is coming down. The cost to outfit the infrastructure. I mean, we have places in the country, Florida's done a really good job of keeping the infrastructure up. We have places in the country where they can't even maintain their bridges, let alone go make smart highways and make the investment in that. We talked about the consistent framework for licensing people. Well, if it really requires just going in and pushing a button, then why do you have to be 16? You could be 4. You could be, you know, just kids taking the darn Google card again. These are issues. The perception that folks have, and a part of what we're trying to do and what the department's trying to do through forums like this is to change some of those perceptions, that it doesn't have to be a scary thing. We don't need a million lawyers trying to figure out liability things. You get on that people mover, and as Richard said, you go 30 miles an hour into a wall. There are concerns over at least in my generation, we're not seeing it as much in the millennials, over all this data coming in. Everyone's going to know. Someone could know where I am well, the truth of the matter is, if you're walking around with one of these things, you've already given that up, but it's an issue, and it is a concern, and it's one that's got to be addressed. For the fully autonomous car, it really relies heavily on a very precise and up-to-date set of GIS mapping. Well, you know, the county maintenance guy goes out and throws up a lane closure. That has to be dealt with somehow so that the Google car doesn't, you know, head down the road and not know the cones are there. Again, not insurmountable, but things that have to be dealt with. The sensor visibility, Richard spoke to as well. The second is there's no future for commercial drivers. I was interviewed on the radio, and the person freaked. They said, well, all the truck drivers and all the bus drivers. My estimation, the level 4 autonomy's widespread implementation is probably 20 years away. The fact that it takes, in the light-duty vehicles, 20 plus years for cars to cycle all the way through the fleet. It's sold, second time, third time. It's going to take a while before all the vehicle fleet is turned over. As we talked earlier, we think that commercial drivers may be the first at risk insofar that there are huge potential benefits from things like truck trains and automated buses and that sort of thing. This is going to take some time. And lastly, public transportation agencies need to stop thinking of themselves as bus companies and think of themselves as mobility managers. And if it can take an automated vehicle to get you point to point and eliminate a paratransit trip at $50 or whatever it takes, all the tools the transit agencies are going to have to shift their mindsets, and some of them have, and I'm sure the folks here are thinking in that direction, as opposed to feeling threatened by this technology that it's going to put them out of business. That's some of what we hear from the transit industry. The third misconception is that autonomous vehicles are new. Richard used a good example of the elevator. I'll use these guideway technologies that have been around since the 70s and some of the personal rapid transit systems that are being developed around the world at Heathrow Airport and Dubai and other places. Many of the heavy rail systems in Washington, D.C. and in San Francisco are capable of running in a fully autonomous mode. Many of them don't for perception and political reasons, but the technology is there to do that. So they really are, the idea of getting in something that's computer driven, whether it's the people mover in Miami or the one at Orlando Airport or the one at Tampa, is not a new thing. How am I doing on time, RJ? Okay. So the third question I was asked to try to address is what should local governments and metropolitan planning organizations be thinking about? Well, first of all, this has enormous implications for the automobile ownership models, mode choice, and mobility, which are all the things that you're concerned about. This could be, if you can send your car home and summon it back, well, you've just doubled the amount of traffic that trip took, right? The flip side is, if you don't need to park cars in a downtown or the city center area, then you don't need to waste space on parking structures, and you can invest in business parks and housing and commercial development and that sort of thing. Cuts both ways. If you can be working and FaceTiming with your kids, all of a sudden, that distance that you're willing to make that commute could quadruple, which could sprawl development in another way. That it's not the price of your house that would be the limiting factor or the driver as to how far out. It would be your willingness and ability to buy one of these things, potentially. Again, the flip side of that is we see that the millennial generation are not as enamored with driving. They're not as enamored with car as a status. They want the latest iPad Air, but they're not so much about the Hemi Cuda or whatever was hot for us. So you can now run these cars at closer headways. You can fit them into, say, smaller lanes. You've got a smart traffic control signal that knows that everybody's coming, when they're coming, how to optimize the flow in the city. Could have enormous positive implications for reductions in capital investments, freeing up that money to be used for additional technologies, preserving the system, and that sort of thing. And what I think planners need to think about, and what you all need to think about in your long-range plan, is that 25 years is 2040, and that's the planning horizon year and what you're all thinking about. And the paradigm shifted. Planners in the 60s missed the whole thing it was a huge mistake. Fortunately, I'm a little older to have missed that, but no one grabbed on to the women entering the workforce and the two-income household early enough, and missed the explosive growth of VMT and all the congestion and all that. We can't assume that's going to continue for a couple of reasons. One, we're almost at one car per person, so how much more can we drive? Second is, if we're into different value systems about automobiles, neoclassical development where the young professionals want to be downtown, they want to be where the activity center is. We've got to think about those things before we keep assuming that this vehicle miles traveled is going to keep exploding at 4 or 5% per year. I talked a little bit about this in terms of this could cut either way. You got to think about that in terms of land use. The coordination, I think, with MPOs, you wouldn't want, just as Richard used the state as an example, within a state, you wouldn't want there to be conflicting rules about automated parking and that sort of thing. And then what could be enormously powerful for planners is imagine the amount of granular data and information you could have. You wouldn't have to try and calibrate some forecast model. You would know. You would know every trip, where it began and where it ended and that sort of thing, as long as you could scrub personal identification information out of it. That would be a powerful, powerful thing for the transportation planning industry. I know I'm getting low on time, so I'll just talk a little bit about transit in particular. We talked about we could potentially lower the cost of transit by sending a particular vehicle for a particular trip. A third of the operating cost of a transit agency is an operator, frankly. Flip side is, if we get the kind of potential congestion savings and additional capacity on the highway, the choice rider, we're making it more competitive, we're making it perhaps more attractive to use the highway as opposed to the transit system. Probably the biggest thing I would ask the planning folks here to think about is this right here. And that is, you're planning rail systems or heavy transit, heavy capital transit projects. Their theoretically useful life should be 50 to 80 years. Okay. Do you invest in a technology that in 40 years is antiquated? Do people who are opposed to a specific project use this as a way to make any decision in the short or medium run? I don't have those answers. I'm just saying that it's a danger, and we're beginning to see that pop up. I think for the short run, you got to press on. You've got issues to solve. You've got congestion. You've got riders. You've got to service. But in the long run, I mean, it probably makes sense to step back a little bit and think if it makes sense. 25 years out, okay, I'm going to use this guy from Continental who said he thought that the fully autonomous cars would be 2025 is when they'd be here. So what do I see? And then I'll wrap up. I would see essentially universal use of autonomous vehicles off-road, mining, on ports, portside, drayage, moving containers from ships to distribution places, on-campus circulators, business parks, Disney. I mean, it would be widespread. It would be everywhere. I would see by then there would be special lanes where you'd have truck trains and bus trains. There's an interesting study done by Alan Kornhauser that shows just by using existing technology in cars with adaptive cruise control, if you put those on buses running through the Lincoln Tunnel into Manhattan every morning, the tunnel's only used for buses. Just by shrinking that a few seconds, you can increase the capacity of that bus line by tens of thousands of seated passengers per hour, just by being able to move that many more buses through there. That's some of the power that this technology has. That's technology that exists today. I think there'd be general acceptance of these things for personal use. I just don't think that again, because of the delay in moving things through the fleet, that they'll necessarily all be there. I think that the majority of vehicles will have that level 3. That'll be just about everyone. Traffic jam autopilot, that's coming soon. Vehicle to infrastructure interfaces where technology already exists, but it's not been deployed yet, where a car can recognize a do not enter sign, stop the car, and make the driver have to override that and make a conscious decision. That kind of stuff will be commonplace everywhere in 25 years. As I mentioned earlier, I think that the fact that we won't have to protect occupants through physical barriers, we can have lighter vehicles that will allow for higher efficiencies, whether it's gasoline, whether it's electric, whether it's hydrogen fuel cells, whatever they are. And lastly, I think that the more efficient use of the system, being able to squeeze more vehicles through, lessen the footprint, increase the efficiency of the traffic signal system and so forth, will reduce the need for the physical expansion in the future. I ran through a lot very quickly. I appreciate being here, and I thank you for your attention. If you want to follow up, you can email me there or go visit the site if you'd like to read any of the white papers on the policy work we've been doing. Again, I appreciate your attention, and thank you for the invitation.